Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. I'm from a small town in northwest Wisconsin. To give you an idea of how small this town is, we only have a gas station and a bar. The population was about 112 people, and it was mainly older folks at the time. I lived on the outskirts of this town with my grandma and two sisters. We lived on a parsonage, which is basically a house close to a church. The pastor used to live there to stay close to the church, but the church rented it out, and my grandma was paying for it. It was a lovely house, located across the road from the church. When looking at it from the road, there was a graveyard on the right side of the property. The house had 4 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a 2-car garage, and everything was on one level except for the basement. Surrounding the left and back side of the house was a thick set of woods, a mix of pine trees, oak woods, and tall grass. It was a lovely spot during the summer, and my sisters and I would play in the forest all summer. Now, on to why I'm writing this. The other day, I had a conversation with my grandma. She's getting up there in age and has started telling me old stories from when my sisters and I were kids. This one made me remember something unusual. I had this friend I used to play in the forest with. They were tall and dark and never came out from behind the trees. I remember how tall they were, about 7 feet high. Their head would poke out from up in the trees. The only part one clearly remember seeing was the deer skull it wore on its face. It would occasionally poke out, but I never felt fear thinking about this creature. Instead, I felt uneasy yet slightly protected, if that makes sense. My sister and I always played hide and seek with it. The creature made a noise when we found it, a sound like low cooing. It was fun to be around, and it seemed to make the forest light up. However, it did stink. My younger sister, who was about 6 at the time, called it stinky because of the smell. I remember seeing this creature climb trees in a way that seemed otherworldly. It moved like a shadow, traveling silently through the woods. One day after school, my sisters and I went into the woods and found a small fort made of sticks. We assumed the creature had created it. We played there, making mud pies and having fun. Then we heard my grandmother screaming for us to come inside. She sounded panicked, and since she never did this, we all ran inside. Once we were in, she locked the door behind us and told us to duck down while she tried calling the police. She whispered, "A man was lying flat in the grass. How did you not see him?" I was in shock, wondering what the man wanted. My sisters were crying, and my grandma was trying to calm down, but nothing worked. About 10 minutes later, the local cops showed up. My grandma explained what she had seen. The cops searched the property but found nothing. They told my grandmother to call them immediately if the man returned, then left. After that, my grandma didn't let us play outside for a few months. It was a hard time, especially since I was entering my preteens, and I gave her a hard time about it, a behavior I still feel guilty about. Eventually, she relaxed and allowed us to play outside again, but we never saw the creature or the man again. For years, I've wondered about the connection between them. Was the man hunting the creature? Was he trying to see it? Did he build the fort, maybe to lure the creature out? Or was the man somehow the creature all along? It doesn't make sense with how fluidly the creature moved through the trees, but I can't help but wonder. I live on a 13-acre property in an area where the suburbs transition into rural farmland. My parents live in the main house near the road, while my fiancé and I converted one of the barns on the back half of the property into our home. Our house and another barn are set in a broad clearing surrounded on 3 sides by woods. We don't get many visitors out here. Since we moved into the house about a year ago, I've had this inexplicable feeling of terror whenever I'm outside at night. I've lived in the woods my whole life, including in far more remote places, but I've never felt this way before. The woods have always felt like home to me, like they were my woods. But here, it feels different. I can't shake the sense that I'm trespassing on someone else's land, someone who doesn't want me here. The other night, I took my dog out for his last walk of the day. It was around 11 p.m., and the pitch-black night pressed in from all sides. The floodlights on the side of the house cast a ring of light that barely illuminated the ground around us. As we walked toward the spot where my dog likes to do his business, I heard a noise. It sounded like someone imitating the hoot of an owl, coming from the direction of the other barn, about 30 yards to our right. I was so sure a human made the noise that I called out, assuming it was my dad closing up the barn for the night and trying to spook me. But no one responded. That's when my dog froze, lifting his head from sniffing the ground. He stared intently toward the barn, his hackles raised, and began emitting a low, menacing growl. My dog loves people and animals. He's never shown aggression toward anything, not even other dogs. My dad, especially, is his favorite person in the world. There was no way he would growl at him. A chill ran through me as the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My dog had stopped at the very edge of where the floodlight met the darkness of the woods. Usually, the light fades gradually into the trees, enough to make out their outlines. But this time, it ended abruptly in a solid wall of black. Then I heard it again, the same fake owl call, but this time it came from just a few feet away, right on the other side of the darkness. My dog jumped and started barking, positioning himself between me and the sound. He's only a little guy, so I scooped him up and bolted for the house. As I ran, I heard the noise again. This time, it had a strange, warbling quality, almost like laughter. The next day, I went to check on the barn. The doors had been partially broken off their slide, forced the wrong way, as if someone had tried to open them incorrectly. There were no footprints in the sawdust or dirt and no other signs of an intruder. I have no idea what was out there that night, but my dog and I now stay well within the floodlights whenever we go outside after dark. I must have been around 14 or 15 years old when this happened. On my street, there was this guy everyone called Crazy Mike. He lived up to the name, completely unhinged. More on him in a bit. I had a friend, let's call him Charlie. He was the adventurous type, always dragging me along for wild ideas. For a couple of months, we hung out almost daily, often hiking through the nearby woods. Living on a mountain, we had easy access to vast wilderness. We'd explore all day, then head back down before dark. We usually took the roads on the way home for convenience. Charlie lived a few roads above me, so after we returned, I'd walk him to his house before heading home alone. One winter day, we hiked through a creek despite the freezing weather. The ground was covered in snow, and the water was partially frozen. At some point, we thought it'd be fun to walk on the ice. Of course, we fell in. The water wasn't deep, only chest high, but it soaked us. Despite being drenched in freezing water, we kept hiking. Whether it was adrenaline or sheer stubbornness, we didn't feel the cold at first. Hours later, I convinced Charlie it was time to head home. We made our way back to his house, but by then, I was freezing. My body was shutting down, and I could feel the onset of hypothermia. Charlie offered to let me warm up at his place, but my mom called, furious that I hadn't answered my phone in over an hour. She demanded I come home immediately. Reluctantly, I left and began the trek back. To save time, I decided to cut through Crazy Mike's property. It shaved about 10 minutes off the walk, and I figured it would be fine just this once. Mike's property was fenced off, but there was a narrow walkway between his fence and a neighbor's. As I jogged through, Mike burst out of his house, assault rifle in hand, screaming like a lunatic. Terrified, I turned and sprinted home. When I told my mom, she brushed it off, saying I shouldn't have trespassed. Curious, I started asking neighbors about him. The stories were wild. Mike was rumored to be a conspiracy theorist, drug dealer, felon, and overall bad news. Everyone agreed he was dangerous. What made things worse was that I still had to pass his house on the road every day. Though I didn't trespass again, walking by his property was nerve-wracking. I noticed he had cameras on his fence, and they would track me as I walked. These weren't motion-detecting cameras, they were manually controlled. Mike was sitting there, watching me. One night, around 10 or 11, I passed his house, and the cameras followed me as usual. I thought that was the end of it, just another creepy encounter. I was wrong. A few weeks later, during a blizzard, I walked home past Mike's place again. This time, part of his massive 15-foot wooden fence was open, and a large dog bolted out, snarling and barking. The dog radiated aggression, and I was sure it was going to attack. Luckily, I was in good shape and managed to sprint away without slipping on the icy road. If I hadn't been quick, that dog could have done serious damage. Not long after, my family moved out of state because of my mom's new job. That marked the end of my encounters with Crazy Mike. Even now, I wonder what his deal was. Was he really a criminal or just deeply paranoid? Why did a kid walking by his property set him off? Occasionally, I ask old friends on Facebook if they've heard anything about him. Apparently, nothing has changed. The moral of the story? Be cautious in the mountains, some people out there are just as wild as the terrain. Sometimes, all it takes is walking past the wrong house to find out how dangerous they can be. I've always kept an open mind about strange phenomena. I don't claim that things like skinwalkers or Bigfoot definitely exist, but I'm not dismissive either. I've always believed in seeing something to believe it. After what I recently experienced, though, I'm starting to think very differently. It was a typical day in Winnipeg, Manitoba, uneventful and dull. Though the area has its charm, I often find it boring. Living alone, I spend most of my time outdoors, away from the city. I usually seek out wilderness spots nearby, and this time, I headed to southeastern Manitoba. The forest there stretches on for miles, dense and wild. It took me longer than expected to cross into the deeper trails, but once I did, I went off the marked path, as I usually do. Not long after, I stumbled across a small house. It stood alone in the forest, and something about it felt off. When I approached, it became clear there was no one inside. Initially unsettled, I grew used to the eerie vibe and decided to set up my tent in a clearing nearby. The clearing was large, and I pitched my tent close to the tree line, wanting to be near the woods without being completely inside them. It took about 20 to 30 minutes to get everything set up, and I spent another 10 minutes gathering sticks for a fire. The sun was starting to set, so I grabbed my flashlight, ensuring the batteries were fresh, and headed into the forest to collect more wood. The dense thorns and branches made the trek difficult, even with the flashlight. Eventually, I found a smaller clearing filled with sticks and branches. I broke them into manageable pieces and prepared to head back. By now, the moon had risen, and the stars were out in full force. With no light pollution, the sky was breathtaking, a rare sight compared to the city. As I approached my campsite, something struck me. When I had left, the forest had been alive with noise, crickets chirping, birds rustling. Now, it was silent. Completely silent. Even the wind had stilled. A chill ran down my spine. I felt like something was nearby, watching me. I scanned the forest floor and slowly looked up. That's when I saw them, two white, round, beady eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They stared directly at me, unblinking and endless. I could make out the shadowy outline of the creature. It was on all fours, but its height matched mine. I'm 6'2". My heart raced. How could an animal on all fours be that tall? At first, I thought it might be some elaborate prank, but that thought disappeared when I heard the sound. It was a popping noise, like the sound your knees or ankles make after sitting too long, but amplified. I heard it once, then again, as the creature slowly stood up. Paralyzed with fear, I dropped my flashlight. Without thinking, I turned and bolted, running blindly in the opposite direction. In a panic, I searched for my flashlight and finally found it. Hesitant but desperate, I shone it ahead. The eyes were still there, leaning toward the light, growing closer. Then, for a fleeting moment, I saw its face, a massive wolf's head, staring straight at me. I dropped the light again, terror flooding through me, and ran as fast as I could, past my tent and everything else, toward my car. The ground trembled beneath me as heavy footsteps thundered behind. The sound was so loud, it felt as if the earth itself might split open. Reaching the gravel path, I launched myself into the car and slammed the door shut. I sat frozen for a second, trying to process what had just happened. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, those glowing white eyes, still watching from the tree line. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I drove away, leaving everything behind. I haven't gone camping there since, and I don't think I ever will. About 5 years ago, when I was 17, I visited some family in South Dakota where they'd been working for a while. I decided to spend the summer working there too. After about a month, my brother, sister, and her husband decided we should do what we loved, go shoot guns in the woods. Since I had an evening shift that day, we planned to head out after 10 p.m. Once my shift ended, we went to their house to load up the truck with snacks, guns, and ammo. The drive took about 45 minutes, winding up a dirt road surrounded by trees and tall grass. Eventually, the road opened into a flat, open clearing. The nearest tree line was about 100 feet away. It was pitch dark, but the truck's headlights lit up the clearing. Even as we arrived, I felt uneasy, though I dismissed it as being in the woods at night. For the first 20 minutes, nothing unusual happened. We were setting up plastic bottles and gallon buckets as targets. But soon, a feeling of being watched crept over all of us. Then the smell hit, an overpowering stench of rotten eggs. Anyone who's ever shot guns knows they have a smell, but this was something else entirely. No amount of gunpowder or explosions could account for the rotten stench that filled the air. We started looking around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. That's when I saw it. It's an image burned into my memory even now, a thin, humanoid figure crouching in the distance, watching us. Even crouched, it had to be at least 6 feet tall. When I say thin, I mean it barely looked like it had enough flesh to hold itself together, just skin stretched over bones. Its long, dark hair hung in tangles, adding to its ghastly appearance. What made things even stranger was that we all saw it, but in different places in the woods at the same time. Was it an illusion? Were there more than one of them? None of us knew, but when we compared notes, we all described the same features: tall, unnaturally thin, with long, dark hair. We didn't stick around to investigate. We packed up as fast as we could and sped out of there like bats out of hell. Even now, I think back to that night. I've spent hours looking up stories of strange encounters in the woods, but I've yet to find anything that perfectly matches what we saw that day. For a little backstory, I've lived in the same small area all my life. As a child, I used to walk my parents' dogs with them through these woods. Over the years, I've explored and played in them countless times, so I know them like the back of my hand. These days, I still walk my own dog there. In all that time, I've never encountered anything unusual. The strangest things I'd heard were the occasional branch snapping or bushes rustling, which are normal. One day, though, I was running a bit late for my dog's walk. He's only 9 months old and full of energy, so if I don't take him on a good walk, he'll want to play all night. We headed to the woods and got there around 8 p.m. We followed our usual route through the woods, but as we reached the halfway point, I realized it was getting dark quickly. I decided to head back using the shorter path. For reference, the usual path goes around the edge of the woods, while the shorter one cuts straight through the middle. Though it wasn't my regular route, I'd taken it plenty of times before. About 10 or 15 minutes in, I started feeling uneasy, not scared, exactly, but like something was off. I noticed my dog's fur standing up slightly, and he was looking around like he was on high alert. I sped up, trying to shake the feeling. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. I stopped. Just off the side of the path, maybe 15 feet away, was what looked like an archway. It seemed to be made of branches and vines, but what caught my attention was the darkness within it. Unlike the surrounding woods, the inside of the archway was so dark it seemed to block everything beyond it. I took a couple of cautious steps toward it, but my dog had other ideas. He locked his feet into the ground, refusing to go any closer. Being a German Shepherd, he has plenty of strength and weight, and he used it to pull me back. Seeing his reaction snapped me out of it. I realized how foolish it would be to go through the archway. I tried taking a couple of photos, then quickly turned around. My dog practically dragged me back to the car. The next day, I returned to the woods with my dog. When we reached the same spot where I'd seen the archway, there was nothing there. I walked up and down the path, searching for anything that might have explained what I saw, but I found absolutely nothing. That was my experience. I'm not sure what to make of it. I have photos that I want to share, but haven't figured out how to attach them yet. Once I do, I'll send them in for everyone to see. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.